The dust settled on Joshua Hamilton's boots as he watched the woman through the window of her rundown shack on the edge of Fort Worth, Texas, her fingers working methodically to attach worn leather scraps to the hem of what had once been a serviceable dress. And in that moment something shifted in his chest that had nothing to do with the August heat of 1878. He had been riding through this part of town on his way back from delivering cattle to the stockyards, his pockets heavy with the wages he had earned after 3 months on the trail. Fort Worth was growing rapidly, transforming from a military outpost into a bustling cattle town, and Joshua had watched it change over the past 5 years since he had arrived from Missouri at the age of 20. Now 25 and weathered by sun and wind, he had learned to mind his own business in a town where asking too many questions could get a man killed. But something about the sight of that woman, her dark hair falling across her face as she concentrated on her mending, made him forget every lesson he had learned about keeping his distance. The shack leaned slightly to one side, its walls patched with mismatched boards that spoke of poverty and desperation. Joshua knew this area well enough. It was where the town's unwanted lived, the people who could not afford the rooms above the saloons or the boarding houses on Main Street. Widows, drifters, those who had lost everything to disease or bad luck or the simple cruelty of frontier life. He should have ridden on. He had his own room at the boarding house, his own problems to worry about, including the ranch owner who had been hinting that Joshua might be ready to take on more responsibility if he proved himself capable. But instead, he found himself dismounting, tying his horse to a fence post that looked like it might collapse at any moment, and walking toward the open door of the shack. She looked up as his shadow fell across the threshold, and Joshua found himself staring into the most striking green eyes he had ever seen. They were cautious eyes, the kind that had seen too much and trusted too little, set in a face that was beautiful despite the hollowness in her cheeks that spoke of missed meals. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, he guessed, though hardship had a way of making people look older than their years. "Can I help you?" Her voice was steady, neither welcoming nor hostile, just careful. She had set down her needle but kept the dress in her lap, as though ready to use it as a shield if necessary. Joshua removed his hat, feeling suddenly foolish. What was he doing here? What could he possibly say that would not sound like prying or worse, like the kind of proposition that men made to desperate women in this part of town? "I apologize for intruding, miss. I was passing by and could not help but notice that you are doing some mending." Her expression did not change. "That is my business, not yours." "Yes, madam, you are absolutely right." He shifted his weight, aware that he was still standing in her doorway like some kind of intruder. "My name is Joshua Hamilton. I work for the Double H Ranch outside of town. I just got paid today, and I was thinking that maybe I could help out someone who might need it." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I do not take charity." "No, madam, I would not expect you to." Joshua felt sweat trickling down his back that had nothing to do with the heat. "But I was thinking maybe you could do some sewing for me. I have got shirts that need mending, and the woman who usually does it for the ranch hands moved to Dallas last month. I would pay you fair wages for the work, but you would need proper materials. So I was thinking I could advance you the cost of fabric and thread, and you could pay me back out of your wages." It was a lie, of course. His shirts were in perfectly good condition, mended by his own rough hands during long nights on the trail. But it was the kind of lie that might preserve her dignity while still allowing him to help her. And Joshua held his breath as he waited to see if she would accept it. Zara Greenwood studied the man in her doorway with the wariness that had kept her alive for the past year since her father's death. Men did not offer help without expecting something in return, and she had learned that lesson the hard way. But there was something different about this one. Something in the way he held his hat in his hands and would not quite meet her eyes, as though he was embarrassed rather than calculating. He was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of outdoor work, and his clothes, though dusty from the trail, were of good quality. His hands were calloused but clean, and he wore a gun on his hip with the unconscious ease of someone who knew how to use it but did not feel the need to prove it. "What kind of mending?" she asked finally. hating the note of hope that crept into her voice despite her best efforts. Whatever needs doing. Torn seams, missing buttons, patches on worn elbows, the kind of work that men on a ranch are no good at doing themselves. Joshua saw the flicker of interest in her eyes and pressed on, keeping his voice casual. There are about 15 of us working the double H right now, and I reckon we could keep a good seamstress busy with steady work. That is, if you're interested. Zara looked down at the dress in her lap, at the leather scraps she had been trying to attach to the hem where the original fabric had worn through completely. The leather had come from an old pair of boots she had found in the alley behind the general store, and she had spent the morning trying to make it work, knowing even as she did so that it looked ridiculous. But it was all she had. The dress was the only one she owned that did not have visible holes, and she needed something presentable if she was going to have any hope of finding work. The two other dresses she possessed were in even worse condition, relegated to wearing inside her shack where no one could see her shame. I would need fabric, she said slowly, and thread in several colors. Needles, too. Mine are getting dull. That seems reasonable. Joshua could hear the shift in her tone, the way her resistance was crumbling in the face of practical necessity, and he felt something loosen in his chest. The general store is still open for another hour. We could go there now, and you could pick out what you need. I cannot go anywhere looking like this. Zara gestured at herself, at the dress with its leather patches and the way her hair hung loose because she had sold her last hair ribbon 2 weeks ago to buy bread. Joshua considered this for a moment, then nodded. What if I go to the store and bring back a selection of fabrics for you to choose from? Then tomorrow, after you have had a chance to make yourself something suitable, we could go to the ranch and I could introduce you to the foreman. That way you would know I'm not making up stories about needing a seamstress. It was a generous offer, perhaps too generous, and Zara felt her suspicion rise again. Why are you doing this? The question hung in the air between them, and Joshua knew that his answer mattered. He could give her some easy lie, some excuse about needing a seamstress or wanting to help a fellow human being, but something about those green eyes made him want to tell the truth, or at least as much of it as he understood himself. Because I saw you through the window working on that dress, and I thought that no one should have to patch their clothes with old leather when fabric exists in the world. He met her gaze steadily, and because my mother once had to do the same thing back in Missouri after my father died, and before she found work as a laundress, I was too young to help her then, but I am not too young now. The silence stretched between them, and then Zara nodded slowly. All right, I will accept your offer, but on the condition that I pay you back for every cent you spend on materials. I meant what I said about not taking charity. Understood, madam. Joshua settled his hat back on his head, feeling ridiculously pleased with himself. I will be back within the hour. Is there anything particular you need? Zara thought for a moment, then said, Cotton fabric, sturdy enough to wear, but fine enough to make a decent dress. Something in a dark color that will not show dirt easily. White thread and black thread, a paper of needles. And if they have any ribbon, just a yard of something simple. Joshua nodded, committing it all to memory. I will see what I can find. Oh, and what is your name, miss? I gave you mine, but you never told me yours. Zara Greenwood. She said it quietly, as though even her name was something she had learned to guard carefully. Miss Greenwood. Joshua touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. I will return shortly. He walked back to his horse, aware that she was watching him from the doorway, and swung himself into the saddle. The ride to the general store took only a few minutes, and he found himself whistling as he went, drawing curious looks from the people he passed. Joshua Hamilton was known in Fort Worth as a steady, reliable man, good with cattle and horses, but not particularly sociable. He did his work, drank his occasional whiskey at the saloon, and kept to himself. He had never been the whistling type. The general store was doing brisk business when he arrived, full of ranch wives buying supplies for the week and cowboys stocking up on tobacco and ammunition. Joshua waited his turn patiently, then approached the counter where Sam Peterson, the store's owner, greeted him with a nod. Joshua, what can I do for you today? I need fabric, Sam. Good quality cotton, dark colored, enough to make a dress, and white thread, black thread, a paper of needles, and about a yard of ribbon. Sam's eyebrows rose slightly. Did not know you were the sewing type, Joshua. It is for a seamstress I am hiring to do mending for the ranch hands. Joshua kept his voice casual, aware that gossip spread through Fort Worth faster than fire through dry grass. Can you help me out? Sam nodded and began pulling bolts of fabric from the shelves behind him. He laid out 3 options on the counter, a dark blue cotton, a deep brown, and a forest green that almost exactly matched the color of Zara's eyes. Joshua reached out and touched the green fabric, feeling the quality of the weave. This one, he said decisively. How much for enough to make a dress? Sam measured out 6 yards, explaining that it should be plenty for a dress with a little extra for mistakes. He added the thread, needles, and a length of cream-colored ribbon to the pile, then calculated the total. Joshua paid without hesitation, though the amount made a noticeable dent in his wages. He told himself it was an investment in securing a seamstress for the ranch, a practical business decision, but he knew he was lying to himself, too. The truth was that he had not been able to forget the image of Zara's fingers working to attach those leather scraps to her dress, the quiet desperation in the careful stitches, and he wanted to erase that image by replacing it with something better. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when he returned to the shack on the edge of town, his saddlebag heavy with fabric and supplies. Zara was still sitting in the doorway, but she had brushed her hair and pinned it back, and Joshua could see that she had been waiting for him, hoping that he would return. He dismounted and pulled the wrapped bundle from his saddlebag. I got the dark green. I hope that is all right. Zara took the bundle with trembling hands and carefully unwrapped it. When she saw the fabric, her breath caught. It was beautiful, far nicer than anything she had owned in years, with a soft texture and a rich color that would suit her complexion. The ribbon was a perfect complement, and the needles were good steel, the kind that would last through months of work. This is too much, she whispered. I cannot possibly pay you back for all of this. Sure you can, Joshua said easily. Figure about 6 weeks of mending work, and we will call it even. That is, assuming you are interested in the job. Zara looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. When can I start? Make yourself a dress tonight. Tomorrow afternoon, I will come by and take you out to the ranch to meet the foreman. His name is Bill Wright, and he is a fair man. He will want to see that you can do the work, so maybe bring along something you have mended to show him. I will. Zara clutched the bundle to her chest. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I will not let you down. Joshua tipped his hat to her. I know you will not, Miss Greenwood. I will see you tomorrow. He rode away feeling lighter than he had in months, as though some burden he had not known he was carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. That night, as he lay in his bed at the boarding house, he thought about Zara's green eyes and the way her whole face had lit up when she saw the fabric. He told himself it was just satisfaction at having done a good deed, but his dreams that night were full of dark hair and careful fingers and a smile he had not yet seen but found himself longing for. Zara worked through the night by the light of a precious candle, her fingers flying as she cut and stitched the green fabric into a dress. She had learned to sew from her mother, who had been a seamstress in St. Louis before marrying Zara's father and following him west in search of opportunities that had never quite materialized. Her mother had died when Zara was 15, and her father had struggled for years before finally succumbing to pneumonia the previous winter, leaving Zara alone and nearly penniless in a town that had little sympathy for unmarried women without family connections. She had survived by taking in washing when she could find it, by selling off everything her parents had owned, by making a dollar stretch further than should have been possible. But it had not been enough. The rent on the shack was 3 months overdue, and the landlord had made it clear that he expected payment soon or else payment of a different kind, the kind that made Zara's skin crawl when she thought about it. She had been trying to find work, any work, but without decent clothes she could not even get past the front doors of the establishments that might have hired her. Now, with the green fabric taking shape beneath her hands, she allowed herself to hope. If this job was real, if this Joshua Hamilton was as honest as he seemed, she might have a chance to climb out of the hole she had fallen into. She might be able to pay her rent, buy food that was not stale bread and thin soup, maybe even save a little money for the future. But more than that, more than the practical considerations, there was something about the way Joshua had looked at her. Not with pity, exactly, and not with the calculating hunger she had seen in other men's eyes. It was more like recognition, as though he had seen her struggle and understood it, as though he knew what it meant to be on the edge of survival and to need a hand up rather than a handout. That understanding was worth more than the fabric, worth more than the job, because it made her feel like a human being again, rather than just another piece of Fort Worth's human wreckage. The dress was finished by dawn, and Zara allowed herself a few hours of sleep before waking to wash in the bucket of water she had drawn from the community pump the day before. She put on the new dress, marveling at how it fit, how the fabric draped properly instead of hanging in patches and tiers. She braided her hair and tied it with the cream ribbon, then looked at herself in the tiny cracked mirror that was her only luxury. The woman who looked back at her was still too thin, still marked by hardship, but she looked respectable. She looked like someone who might be trusted with honest work. Joshua arrived in the early afternoon as promised, riding a different horse this time, a gentle mare that looked suitable for a second rider. He had cleaned up since the day before, his face freshly shaved and his clothes brushed free of trail dust. And when he saw Zara standing in the doorway of her shack in the green dress, his smile was worth every stitch she had sewn through the night. "Miss Greenwood, you look very nice." His voice was sincere, and Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. The fabric was perfect." "Good. I am glad." Joshua dismounted and gestured to the mare. "I brought Daisy for you to ride. She is gentle as a lamb, so you do not need to worry if you are not much of a rider." Zara accepted his help mounting the horse, acutely aware of his hands on her waist as he lifted her into the saddle. She had ridden before, though it had been years, and she was grateful that Daisy did indeed seem patient with her rusty skills. Joshua swung back onto his own horse, and together they rode out of Fort Worth toward the open plains beyond. The Double H Ranch was about an hour's ride from town, sprawling across several thousand acres of Texas grassland. As they approached, Zara could see cattle dotting the landscape and several buildings clustered together, a main house, a bunkhouse, a barn, and various outbuildings. It was impressive in its scope. Speaking of successful enterprise and careful management, Joshua led her to the main house, where they were met by Bill Wright, the foreman. He was a man in his 50s with a weathered face and sharp eyes that assessed Zara quickly but not unkindly. "Bill, this is Miss Zara Greenwood, the seamstress I told you about, Charmar," Joshua said. "Miss Greenwood, this is Bill Wright, the ranch foreman." "Miss Greenwood," Bill nodded to her, "Joshua tells me you can handle mending for 15 men. That is a fair amount of work." "Yes, sir, I can do it." Zara sat up straighter in her saddle. "I have been sewing since I was a child. My mother was a professional seamstress in St. Louis." "Did you bring anything to show me?" Zara had anticipated this. From her pocket, she pulled a handkerchief she had embroidered years ago, one of the few pretty things she had managed to keep. It was fine work, delicate but strong, and Bill examined it with the careful attention of a man who knew the difference between quality and pretense. "This is good work," he said finally. "All right, Miss Greenwood, here is my offer. The ranch will provide you with all the materials you need. You will do mending for the hands, and we will pay you 50 cents a day, 6 days a week. You can work here at the ranch if you prefer, or take the mending back to town with you. What do you say?" 50 cents a day, 6 days a week. That was $3 a week, $12 a month. It was more money than Zara had seen in months, enough to live on and even save a little. She wanted to cry with relief, but instead she kept her voice steady and said, "I say thank you, Mr. Wright. When can I start?" "How about now? I will have the boys bring you whatever they have got that needs mending, and you can take it back to town with you today. Come back on Monday with the finished work, and we will get you started on a regular schedule." Within an hour, Zara had a sack full of shirts, pants, and other garments that needed attention. Joshua helped her secure it to Daisy's saddle, then accompanied her on the ride back to Fort Worth. The sun was warm on their faces, and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves created a comfortable silence that neither felt the need to fill with idle chatter. "Thank you," Zara said finally as they neared the outskirts of town, "for everything, for the fabric, for the job, for taking a chance on someone you do not even know." Joshua glanced at her, and there was something in his expression that made Zara's heart beat a little faster. "I had a feeling about you, Miss Greenwood. Sometimes you just know when someone is worth taking a chance on. I hope I prove you right. You already have." He said it simply, as a statement of fact rather than flattery, and Zara felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Zara would work through most of the week in her shack, her fingers constantly busy with needle and thread as she mended the seemingly endless supply of torn clothing that came from ranch work. Joshua would ride into town every few days, ostensibly to check on her progress or deliver new items for mending, but both of them knew that these visits went beyond simple business necessity. He would linger in her doorway, talking about the ranch and the cattle and the weather, while she would work and listen and occasionally offer her own observations about life in Fort Worth. Slowly, Zara's life began to change. She paid off her back rent and bought herself a second dress, this one a practical brown calico that was suitable for everyday wear. She could afford real coffee again, and meat more than once a week, and she no longer went to bed hungry. The pinched look left her face, replaced by a healthiness that made her green eyes even more striking. She started to smile more, especially when Joshua visited, and she found herself looking forward to his appearances with an anticipation that felt both exciting and dangerous. Joshua, for his part, found himself thinking about Zara constantly. He looked for excuses to ride into town, sometimes inventing tears in his clothes that did not exist just to have a reason to see her. The other ranch hands teased him about his frequent trips to Fort Worth, speculating about whether he had found himself a girl, but Joshua deflected their questions with good-natured evasiveness. He was not ready to share Zara with anyone else yet, not ready to expose this fragile thing growing between them to the crude comments and knowing looks of the bunkhouse. One evening in late September, as the brutal Texas summer was finally giving way to cooler autumn temperatures, Joshua arrived at Zara's shack to find her sitting outside on a rickety chair, enjoying the sunset. She had been crying. He could tell from her red-rimmed eyes, and concern immediately flooded through him. "Miss Greenwood, what is wrong?" He was off his horse in an instant, kneeling beside her chair. "Are you hurt?" No, I'm fine." Zara wiped at her eyes, embarrassed to be caught in a moment of weakness. "I am sorry. It is nothing." "It does not look like nothing." Joshua's voice was gentle. "Talk to me, Zara." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it made her breath catch. "It is just that today marks 1 year since my father died." The words came out in a rush, and I was sitting here thinking about how much has changed, about how a few months ago I did not know how I was going to survive, and now I have steady work and enough to eat, and it is all because you saw me through a window one day and decided to help me. And I suppose I am crying because I am grateful, but also because I wish my father could have lived to see that things worked out all right in the end." Joshua reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around her smaller ones. "I am sure your father would be proud of you, Zara. You have worked hard to make a life for yourself here. That takes courage. I could not have done it without you." She looked at him through her tears, and something shifted in the air between them, something that had been building for weeks but had never been acknowledged aloud. "Joshua, why did you really help me that day?" He could have deflected, could have given her another story about his mother or about Christian duty or about needing a seamstress. But sitting there in the fading light with her hand in his, Joshua found that he did not want to lie anymore. "Because when I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. Like we were two halves of the same coin, both trying to make our way in a world that does not always make it easy." He paused, then said the thing he had been feeling for weeks but had not dared to voice. And because I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and I wanted a reason to know you. Zara's heart pounded so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. I thought I was imagining it, the way you looked at me sometimes. I told myself I was being foolish, that you were just being kind. I am not that kind. Joshua's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I mean, I hope I am a decent man, but what I feel for you goes way beyond kindness, Zara. What do you feel? She needed to hear him say it, needed to know that she was not alone in this dangerous, exhilarating emotion that had been growing inside her. I feel like I want to spend every minute of every day with you. I feel like when I'm at the ranch, I'm just going through the motions until I can see you again. I feel like you are the first thing I think about in the morning and the last thing I think about at night. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. I think I am falling in love with you, Zara Greenwood. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment Zara could not breathe. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Her life had been too hard, too focused on simple survival to leave room for romance. But now, with Joshua's eyes on her and his hand holding hers, she felt like maybe survival was not enough anymore. Maybe she could have something more. I think I am falling in love with you too, she whispered. I've been trying not to because I was afraid that if I admitted it, something would happen to take it away. But I cannot help it, Joshua. When you walk through that door, my whole day gets brighter. Joshua stood and gently pulled her to her feet, his hands framing her face as he looked down at her. Can I kiss you? Yes. The word was barely more than a breath, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and careful, as though she was something precious that might break. Zara melted into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath the fabric of his shirt. The kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more desperate, as though they were both trying to make up for all the weeks of careful distance and unspoken longing. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Joshua rested his forehead against hers. I want to court you properly, Zara. I want to take you to church socials and town dances and anywhere else you want to go. I want everyone in Fort Worth to know that you are my girl, if you will have me. I will have you, Zara said, laughing through her tears. I absolutely will have you, Joshua Hamilton. Over the following months, Joshua made good on his promise. He courted Zara with a determination and sincerity that quickly became the talk of Fort Worth. They attended church together every Sunday, sitting side by side in the rough wooden pews, while Zara tried to focus on the sermon instead of the warm pressure of Joshua's arm against hers. They went to town socials, where Joshua danced with her despite his admitted lack of skill, his boots occasionally finding her toes but his smile never faltering. They took walks along the Trinity River, talking about everything and nothing, building the foundation of understanding that would support them through the years to come. Joshua learned that Zara dreamed of one day having her own dress shop, a place where ladies could come for custom garments made with care and skill. He learned that she loved thunderstorms, the way they swept across the Texas plains with dramatic fury, and that she was afraid of snakes but not of spiders. He learned that she had a sharp wit and a generous heart, that she was fiercely independent but also lonely after years of struggling alone, and that she snored very slightly when she was deeply asleep, though he only discovered this last detail when he found her dozing in her chair one evening after a particularly long day of sewing. Zara learned that Joshua had come to Texas after his father's death, seeking a fresh start far from the memories of Missouri. She learned that he was good with horses, patient and gentle, and that he had a talent for reading the weather that made him valuable during cattle drives. She learned that he sent money back to his mother in Missouri every month, that he loved poetry but was embarrassed to admit it, and that he had a scar on his ribs from a bull's horn that had come too close during his first year at the Double H. She learned that he wanted children someday, a whole house full of them, and that he wanted to build something lasting, something that would outlive him. By the time winter arrived, bringing cold winds and occasional snow to Fort Worth, Joshua knew that he wanted to marry Zara. The knowledge had been building in him for weeks, but it crystallized one evening in December when he arrived at her shack to find her kneeling by the fireplace, trying to coax warmth from a pitiful pile of wood. The shack was drafty and cold, and Joshua realized with sudden clarity that he could not bear another winter of knowing that Zara was living in these conditions when he could offer her something better. The next day, he rode into Fort Worth with a purpose. He visited the land office first, where he put down a deposit on a plot of land just outside town, a few acres with good water access and enough space for a house and maybe a garden. Then he went to the jeweler, where he spent nearly all his savings on a simple gold ring set with a small emerald that reminded him of Zara's eyes. Finally, he went to see Bill Wright at the ranch and requested a private conversation. "Bill, I want to ask for a raise," Joshua said, standing in the ranch office with his hat in his hands. "I have been here 5 years now, and I have worked hard. I think I have proved myself." Bill leaned back in his chair and studied Joshua. "This is about that girl, is it not? The seamstress. Her name is Zara, and yes, it is about her. I want to marry her, Bill, but I cannot ask her to share that shack she is living in, and I cannot afford to build a house on what I am making now. You know, the ranch is planning to expand next year. We're going to need someone to manage the new herd we are bringing in, someone who knows the cattle and can handle the responsibility." Bill paused. "I was thinking about offering you that position, Joshua. It would mean more money, enough to support a wife, and maybe start building that house you're thinking about, but it would also mean more hours and more pressure. Think you can handle it?" Joshua's heart leaped. "Yes, sir. I know I can. I will not let you down." "All right then, consider yourself promoted. You will start the new duties in January and your pay will go up accordingly." Bill stood and extended his hand. "Congratulations, Joshua. Now go ask that girl to marry you before someone else beats you to it." Joshua rode back to Fort Worth feeling like he was floating. That evening, he asked Zara to take a walk with him despite the cold, and she bundled up in her warmest shawl and joined him. They walked to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie, and Joshua stopped under a sky full of stars. "Zara, there is something I need to ask you." His voice was nervous, and Zara's heart began to race. "These past few months have been the best of my life. Every day I spend with you makes me more certain that you are the person I want to build a future with." He dropped to one knee in the cold grass, pulling the small box from his pocket. Zara's hands flew to her mouth, tears already starting in her eyes. "Zara Greenwood, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you have made me?" "Yes," the word burst from her, loud and joyful in the quiet night. "Yes, Joshua, I will marry you." He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he set her down, he slipped the ring onto her finger, and they both stared at it for a moment, marveling at the reality of what had just happened. "I got promoted today," Joshua said, his words tumbling out in his excitement. "Bill is making me herd manager starting in January. The pay is enough that we can build a house, Zara, a real house with solid walls and a good roof and enough room for a family." "A family?" Zara repeated, the words sounding like a dream. 6 months ago, she had been alone and desperate, patching her dress with leather scraps and wondering how much longer she could survive. Now she was engaged to a good man with prospects, planning a future that included a house and children and all the things she had thought were forever beyond her reach. They were married in the spring of 1879 in a small ceremony at the Fort Worth church, with Bill Wright standing as Joshua's witness and another seamstress Zara had befriended standing as hers. Zara wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had made herself, working on it in secret for weeks, and Joshua thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen when she walked down the aisle toward him. The preacher spoke about commitment and love and building a life together, but Joshua barely heard the words. He was too focused on Zara's face, on the way she smiled at him with such trust and joy, on the miracle that she had agreed to be his wife. They spent their wedding night in a room at the boarding house, the same room where Joshua had been living, and in the morning they began their married life together. Joshua had been working on their house for weeks, enlisting help from the other ranch hands to get the frame up and the roof on before the wedding. It was not finished yet, still needing interior walls and furniture and 100 other details, but it was theirs. They moved what few possessions Zara had from the shack to the new house, and Joshua delighted in watching her face as she explored the rooms, planning where everything would go and how they would make it a home. The first year of their marriage was not without its challenges. Building a life together meant learning each other's habits and quirks, learning how to navigate disagreements and compromise on decisions. Joshua's new responsibilities at the ranch meant long hours, sometimes days away when the cattle needed to be moved, or problems arose that required his attention. Zara continued her sewing work, not just for the ranch, but also for other customers in Fort Worth who had heard about her skills. She was building a reputation, and while the dream of her own shop was still distant, it felt more achievable than it ever had before. But through all the challenges, through the adjustments and occasional arguments and moments of frustration, there was also joy. There was the joy of waking up next to each other, of sharing meals at their own table, of building something together piece by piece. There was the joy of working side by side in their garden, planting vegetables that would feed them through the winter. There was the joy of sitting together on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the Texas prairie while they talked about their days and their plans and their dreams for the future. In the summer of 1880, Zara discovered she was pregnant. She told Joshua one evening when he came home from the ranch, her hands trembling as she placed them on her still flat belly. Joshua's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and whooping loud enough that the neighbors must have heard, and then he very carefully set her down as though she might break, asking if she was all right and whether she should be sitting down and whether she needed anything. "I need you to stop fussing," Zara said, laughing at his sudden nervousness. "Women have babies all the time, Joshua. I will be fine." But Joshua could not help fussing. He became protective in a way that was both endearing and occasionally exasperating, insisting that Zara not lift anything heavy or work too long hours or do anything that might possibly risk the baby. Zara tolerated his hovering with good humor, understanding that it came from love and excitement rather than any belief that she was fragile. She continued her sewing work, though she did cut back on her hours as her pregnancy progressed and the Texas heat made everything more exhausting. Their son was born in February of 1881, during a cold snap that had Joshua frantically feeding the fire to keep the house warm, while Zara labored with the assistance of a midwife from town. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Joshua paced outside the bedroom door, terrified by the sounds coming from within, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake in getting Zara pregnant, in bringing a child into the world when childbirth was so dangerous. But then the midwife opened the door and told him he could come in, and Joshua entered to find Zara exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with such love in her eyes that Joshua felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Meet your son," she said softly. Joshua approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny red face peering out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and Zara's delicate features, and Joshua fell in love instantly and completely. "What should we name him?" Zara asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Joshua thought of his own father, who had died too young but who had taught Joshua the value of hard work and integrity. "What about James?" he suggested. "After my father, James Hamilton." Zara smiled. "James Hamilton, I like that. Welcome to the world, James." Being a father changed Joshua in ways he had not anticipated. He became even more driven at work, wanting to provide the best possible life for his growing family. He was promoted again, this time to assistant foreman, which came with an even better salary and more prestige. He used the extra money to improve their house, adding a bedroom for James, and eventually a small workshop where Zara could do her sewing away from the main living areas. Zara threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, She nursed James and sang to him, and spent hours just watching him sleep, marveling at the perfection of his tiny fingers and the way he gripped her thumb with surprising strength. She also continued her sewing work, though she was more selective about the job she took, wanting to balance providing income with being present for her son. 2 years later, in the spring of 1883, their daughter was born. This birth was easier than the first, and Joshua found himself holding a tiny girl with Zara's green eyes and his own light brown hair. They named her Lily after Zara's mother, and James, now a rambunctious toddler, was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to touch her and hold her and show her all his toys. Life settled into a rhythm. Joshua continued to rise through the ranks at the Double H Ranch, eventually becoming foreman when Bill Wright retired in 1885. The position came with a house on the ranch itself, larger and nicer than the one they had built, and though Zara was reluctant to leave the home they had made together, she understood that it was a good opportunity for their family. They moved to the ranch, and Zara found that she liked being closer to Joshua's work, liked being able to see him during the day when he came by the house for lunch, liked being part of the ranch community. By 1887, they had 4 children, James, Lily, and 2 more boys they named Thomas and William. The house was always full of noise and laughter and the chaos that came with a large family. Zara had finally opened her dress shop in Fort Worth, a small storefront that she operated 3 days a week while Joshua's mother, who had moved to Texas to be closer to her son, watched the younger children. The shop was successful, patronized by the growing number of middle-class women in Fort Worth who wanted quality clothing without the expense of ordering from Dallas or St. Louis. Joshua watched his wife run her business with pride, amazed at how far they had both come from that day in 1878 when he had found her mending her dress with leather scraps. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he would remember that image and marvel at the path their lives had taken. He remembered the desperation in her careful stitches, the wariness in her eyes when he had first approached her, the gradual thawing of her defenses as she learned to trust him. He remembered the first time he had kissed her, the day he had asked her to marry him, the moment he had first held each of their children. All of it traced back to that single decision to stop his horse and walk up to a stranger's door, to offer help to someone who needed it, to take a chance on a woman with green eyes and talented fingers and a determination to survive. Zara, for her part, never forgot what Joshua had done for her. She never forgot the kindness of a man who had seen her at her lowest point and had offered not pity, but opportunity. She never forgot the way he had looked at her that first day, like she was worth something despite her patched dress and desperate circumstances. She made sure their children knew the story, told them about the leather scraps and the green fabric and the way their father had bought her not just material goods, but hope and a future. She wanted them to understand that kindness mattered, that small actions could change lives, that seeing the worth in another person was a gift beyond measure. In 1890, when Fort Worth was experiencing its transformation from frontier town to modern city, Joshua and Zara attended a celebration at the new courthouse. They were respected members of the community now, Joshua as foreman of one of the most successful ranches in the area, and Zara as a businesswoman in her own right. They dressed in their best clothes and mingled with other prominent citizens, discussing the railroad expansion and the new businesses coming to town, and all the ways Fort Worth was changing. At one point during the evening, they found themselves standing alone on a balcony, looking out over the town that had been the backdrop for their entire relationship. The streets were lit with electric lights now, a novelty that still amazed them, and they could hear music and laughter drifting up from below. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Zara asked, leaning against the balcony railing. "If you had ridden past my shack that day instead of stopping?" Joshua put his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "I think about it all the time. I think about how close I came to missing out on the best thing that ever happened to me." "I would probably have ended up working in a saloon," Zara said quietly, "or worse. I was running out of options, Joshua. You saved my life that day, even if you did not realize it. You saved mine too." Joshua turned her to face him. his hands on her shoulders. I was just existing before I met you, Zara, going through the motions, working and sleeping and working some more. You gave me a reason to do more than just exist. You gave me a purpose and a family and a life worth living. Zara reached up and touched his face, the face that had become so familiar over the years, the face she saw first thing every morning and last thing every night. There were lines there now that had not been there in 1878, weathered by sun and wind and the passage of time. But the eyes were the same, warm and kind and full of love for her. "We built something good together, did we not?" she said. "We built something amazing." Joshua kissed her forehead. "And we are not done yet. We have got years ahead of us, Zara. Years to watch our children grow up and start families of their own. Years to grow old together. Years to keep building on the foundation we started with a piece of green fabric and a second chance." They stayed on the balcony for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the lights of Fort Worth twinkle in the darkness and thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had not been an easy journey. They had faced hardship and struggle, had worked harder than should have been possible, had made sacrifices and tough choices. But they had faced it all together, and that had made all the difference. As the years continued to pass, Joshua and Zara's lives remained intertwined with the growth and development of Fort Worth and the surrounding ranching community. Joshua's reputation as a skilled and fair foreman meant that the Double H Ranch continued to prosper, even as the cattle industry faced challenges from overgrazing, harsh winters, and fluctuating market prices. He was known throughout the region as a man who treated his workers fairly, who paid good wages, and expected hard work in return, but who also understood that the men who worked for him were human beings with families and problems of their own. Zara's dress shop expanded, and by 1895 she had hired 2 other seamstresses to help handle the volume of orders. She specialized in wedding dresses and formal wear, gaining a reputation for quality craftsmanship and attention to detail. Women came from as far away as Dallas to commission dresses from her, and she took pride in creating garments that made her customers feel beautiful and confident. She never forgot her own wedding dress, made from fabric she could barely afford, sewn in a moment of hope and anticipation. Every bride who left her shop wearing a Greenwood original carried a little bit of that hope with them. Their children grew up surrounded by love and opportunity. James, the eldest, showed an early interest in ranching and often accompanied his father on his rounds, learning about cattle management and business operations. By the time he was 18, he was working full-time at the ranch, and Joshua began grooming him to eventually take over the foreman position. Lily inherited her mother's talent for sewing and her father's business sense, and she began helping in the shop as soon as she was old enough, showing a particular gift for design and an understanding of what women wanted in their clothing. Thomas and William were still young, but they showed promise in their own ways, Thomas with a love of horses that suggested he might become a trainer, and William with a sharp mind for numbers that Joshua thought might serve him well in business or law. In 1898, when Joshua was 45 and Zara 43, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a large party at the ranch. Their children had organized the whole thing as a surprise, working with Joshua's ranch hands and Zara's shop employees to create an event that would honor the love and partnership their parents had built. Nearly 100 people attended, testament to the respect and affection the Hamiltons had earned in the community. During the party, James stood up to make a speech. He was 23 now, tall and broad-shouldered like his father, with his mother's green eyes and a quiet confidence that served him well. He raised his glass and waited for the crowd to quiet down. "Most of you know the story of how my parents met," he began. "How my father saw my mother mending her dress with leather scraps because she had nothing else, and how he bought her fabric the next day. It is a story I have heard my whole life, and for a long time I thought it was just a nice story about kindness and charity." He paused and looked at his parents, who were sitting together at the head table, Joshua's arm around Zara's shoulders. "But as I have gotten older, I have come to understand that it was about so much more than that. It was about seeing worth in someone when the world had decided they had none. It was about taking action instead of just feeling sympathy. It was about building a partnership based on respect and trust and genuine affection. James's voice grew thick with emotion. My father gave my mother fabric for a dress, but she gave him something to work for, something to dream about, someone to build a life with. They saved each other, and in doing so, they created a family and a legacy that will continue long after we are all gone. He raised his glass higher. So here is to Joshua and Zara Hamilton, to 20 years of marriage and 45 years of being the kind of people we all aspire to be. May you have 20 more years together, and may we all be lucky enough to find what you found that day in 1878. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Zara found herself crying happy tears while Joshua held her close. They had built something good, something lasting, and moments like this reminded them of how far they had come and how fortunate they were. But life, as always, had both joys and sorrows in store. In 1902, Joshua's mother passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 78. She had been a constant presence in their lives, helping with the children and the household, offering wisdom and support through difficult times. Her death hit Joshua hard, bringing back memories of his father's death years earlier and the struggles his mother had faced afterward. But he took comfort in knowing that she had spent her final years surrounded by family, that she had gotten to know her grandchildren and see them grow up, that she had been loved and valued until the very end. The funeral was held at the Fort Worth church where Joshua and Zara had been married, and as Joshua stood by his mother's grave, Zara held his hand and thought about the circle of life, about how his mother's struggles had shaped Joshua into the man who had been willing to help a desperate stranger, about how that act of kindness had led to this family, these children, this life they had built together. In 1905, Lily married a lawyer from Dallas, a good man named Robert, who had been courting her for 2 years. The wedding was a grand affair, with Zara designing and creating her daughter's wedding dress, pouring all her love and skill into every stitch. As she watched Lily walk down the aisle, radiant in white silk and lace, Zara remembered her own wedding day and sent up a silent prayer that her daughter's marriage would be as happy and fulfilling as her own had been. James married a year later to the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and Joshua gave him 10 acres of land to build a house on, wanting to keep his son close. Thomas, now 22, had indeed become a horse trainer and had a growing reputation for his ability to work with difficult animals. William, at 20, had decided to attend college in Austin, the first member of either family to pursue higher education, and Joshua and Zara were immensely proud, even though it meant having him far from home. By 1910, Joshua and Zara were grandparents 3 times over, with more grandchildren undoubtedly on the way. They had reached that stage of life where their primary role was to offer wisdom and support to their children as they navigated the challenges of raising families and building careers. Joshua had officially retired from his position as foreman, though he still consulted for the ranch and could often be found working alongside the younger men, unable to completely give up the life that had defined him for so long. Zara had turned the day-to-day operations of her shop over to Lily, who had discovered that she loved running a business even more than designing dresses. They spent their days working in their garden, taking rides across the prairie on horses that were gentler than the ones they had ridden in their youth, visiting with their children and grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. They had been married for 31 years, together for 32, and the love between them had deepened and matured into something that went beyond passion or romance. It was a partnership forged in the fires of hardship and strengthened by years of mutual support and shared experience. They knew each other completely, understood each other's moods and needs without words, could communicate entire conversations with just a look. One evening in the summer of 1912, they sat together on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the land they had called home for so many years. The air was warm and still, and the crickets were beginning their evening song. Zara was doing some hand sewing, a baby blanket for their newest grandchild, while Joshua carved a small wooden horse for one of the older grandchildren. "Do you remember that first day?" Zara asked suddenly, not looking up from her sewing. "When you came to my door and offered to hire me as a seamstress?" Joshua smiled. "I think about it all the time. I remember how scared you looked and how determined. I remember thinking that you were the kind of person who would not give up no matter how hard things got." "I was terrified," Zara admitted. "Terrified that you would see through my brave act and realize how desperate I was. Terrified that you would turn out to be like other men I had encountered, wanting something in return for your help. Terrified that even if you were genuine, I would somehow mess it up and lose the opportunity. But you did not mess it up. You grabbed hold of that chance with both hands and made something of it." "We made something of it," Zara corrected. "I could not have done any of it without you. Joshua, you gave me more than fabric that day. You gave me hope. You gave me a future. You gave me everything." Joshua set down his carving and reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "You know what I realized recently? That day I saw you through your window, I was at a crossroads in my own life. I was successful by any measure, had a good job and money in my pocket, but I was lonely. I was going through the motions without any real purpose or passion. And then I saw you, and something in me just knew that you were important, that you were going to change my life." "I did change your life," Zara said with a slight smile. "I gave you 4 children and countless sleepless nights and a wife who insists on rearranging the furniture every spring." Joshua laughed. "Best decision I ever made, encouraging you with those furniture rearrangements and all." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. The years had been good to them, better than either of them had dared to hope during those early days when every day was a struggle and the future was uncertain. They had built a life together that was rich in love and family and purpose. They had raised children who were good people, who contributed to their communities and treated others with kindness. They had created a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lives. "I love you, Zara Hamilton," Joshua said quietly. "I have loved you since the day I saw you mending that dress, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Zara set down her sewing and turned to face him fully, her green eyes still as striking as they had been 34 years earlier, though now framed by laugh lines and crow's feet earned through decades of smiling. "And I love you, Joshua Hamilton. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God every day that you were the kind of man who would stop to help a stranger in need." They kissed then, a gentle kiss full of affection and familiarity, and when they pulled apart, they were both smiling. They returned to their respective tasks, comfortable in the silence, needing no words to express what they felt. They had said everything that needed saying over the years, and now they could simply be together. 2 souls that had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful from a chance encounter and a piece of green fabric. As the years continued to roll by, Joshua and Zara aged gracefully, their love remaining constant even as their bodies grew older and slower. By 1920, they had 9 grandchildren and had just welcomed their first great-grandchild, a baby boy that James's eldest daughter had named Joshua in honor of her grandfather. The news had brought tears to old Joshua's eyes, and he had held the tiny infant with a tenderness that came from knowing how precious and fragile life was. Fort Worth had continued to grow and change around them. The wild frontier town they had known in their youth was now a modern city with automobiles and electric streetcars, telephone lines, and moving picture theaters. The Double H Ranch had been broken up and sold off in pieces as the open range gave way to fenced properties, and the cattle industry adapted to new economic realities. The house they had lived in for so many years was sold to new owners, and Joshua and Zara moved into a smaller, more manageable home closer to town, where they could be near Lily's dress shop and walk to church on Sundays. The world was changing rapidly, hurtling toward a future that sometimes seemed alien to two people who had come of age in the 1870s. But through all the changes, through all the progress and modernization, Joshua and Zara remained anchored to each other and to the values that had guided them throughout their lives: hard work, integrity, kindness, and the belief that every person deserved dignity and opportunity. In the spring of 1925, Joshua fell ill with pneumonia. He was 72 years old, and though he had always been strong and healthy, the illness hit him hard. Zara nursed him devotedly, sitting by his bedside day and night, refusing to leave even when their children urged her to rest. She would not risk missing a moment with him, not when she knew that their time together might be running out. Joshua recovered, though the illness left him weaker than he had been before. He moved more slowly now, tired more easily, but his mind remained sharp and his love for Zara as strong as ever. They spent their days quietly, reading to each other, receiving visits from their children and grandchildren, reminiscing about the life they had shared. One afternoon, as they sat together in their small parlor, Zara mending a shirt and Joshua reading the newspaper, he suddenly set the paper aside and looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "What is it?" she asked, concerned. "I was just thinking about that dress," he said. "The one you were mending with leather scraps the day I met you. Do you still have it?" Zara smiled. "Of course I do. I could never throw it away. It is in the trunk in the bedroom, wrapped in tissue paper. Could you get it? I would like to see it." Puzzled but willing, Zara went to the bedroom and retrieved the dress. It had yellowed with age, the leather scraps she had attached to the hem now cracked and brittle, but it was still recognizable as the garment it had been. She brought it back to the parlor and laid it across Joshua's lap. He touched it gently, his fingers tracing the careful stitches she had made so long ago. "This dress changed my life," he said softly. "If you had not been wearing this, if you had not been mending it when I rode past your window, I might never have stopped. I might never have met you. Everything we have built together, everything we are, started with this dress." Zara sat down beside him and took his hand. "It is just fabric and leather, Joshua. What changed our lives was not the dress, but your kindness, your willingness to see me as a person worth helping rather than just another poor woman to be pitied or ignored." "Maybe," Joshua conceded, "but I am still glad you kept it. It is a reminder of where we started, of how far we have come." They sat together holding hands, the old dress spread across their laps like a tangible piece of their history. Outside they could hear the sounds of modern Fort Worth, automobiles honking, the distant whistle of a train, children playing in the street. But inside their small parlor, time seemed to stand still, and they were young again, a cowboy and a seamstress falling in love against all odds, building a future from fabric and hope and determination. Joshua lived for 3 more years, and they were good years, filled with family gatherings and quiet moments and the deep contentment that came from a life well lived. He died peacefully in his sleep in November of 1928, with Zara lying beside him, her hand in his just as it had been for 50 years of marriage. He was 75 years old, and he had lived to see his children and grandchildren established and happy, to know that the legacy he and Zara had built would continue long after he was gone. Zara mourned him deeply, but she did not fall apart. She had been through too much, survived too many hardships to be completely undone even by this greatest of losses. She continued to live in their small house, surrounded by photographs and memories, receiving regular visits from her children and grandchildren. She continued to sew, though her fingers were not as nimble as they once had been, creating quilts for each new great-grandchild and repairing beloved items for family members who knew that anything Grandma Zara mended would last for years. She lived for another 12 years, watching her family continue to grow and prosper, seeing the world change in ways that would have been unimaginable in her youth. She lived through the Great Depression, quietly helping family members who struggled, never mentioning that she was giving away most of her own limited resources to ensure that her children and grandchildren had enough. She lived through the beginning of another world war, sending prayers after great-grandsons who enlisted to fight in distant lands. In the summer of 1940, at the age of 85, Zara Greenwood Hamilton passed away quietly in her sleep, much as her husband had done 12 years earlier. She was surrounded by photographs of the family she and Joshua had created, by the physical evidence of the life they had built together, the quilts she had sewn, the furniture they had chosen together, the dress with leather scraps that still resided in her trunk, carefully preserved as a reminder of where it all began. Her funeral was attended by more than 200 people, a testament to the impact she and Joshua had made on their community. Their children spoke about their parents' love story, about the cowboy who had bought fabric for a seamstress, and the partnership that had grown from that simple act of kindness. They spoke about the values their parents had instilled in them, the importance of helping others, of seeing the worth in every person, of building something lasting through hard work and dedication. James, now 69 years old and a grandfather himself, stood at his mother's graveside and told the story one more time, the story that had become family legend about the dress and the leather scraps and the fabric that had changed two lives. My father saw my mother at her lowest point, and instead of looking away, he stepped forward, James said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. He saw someone who needed help, and he helped her in a way that preserved her dignity and gave her a chance to build a better life. My mother took that chance and ran with it, working harder than anyone I have ever known, building a business and a family and a legacy. He paused, emotion making his voice thick. They taught us that love is more than just romance or passion. It is partnership. It is showing up every day and choosing each other, even when things are hard. It is building something together that is greater than what either person could have built alone. They taught us that kindness matters, that seeing the worth in another person is a gift beyond measure, that the smallest actions can have the most profound consequences. James looked down at his mother's casket, then over at his father's grave beside it. They are together again now, the cowboy and the seamstress, reunited after too many years apart. And the love they shared, the life they built, continues on in all of us who were blessed to be part of their family. As the sun set over Fort Worth that evening, casting long shadows across the cemetery where Joshua and Zara Hamilton now rested side by side, their story became part of the city's history. It was told and retold through the generations, adapted and embellished, but never losing its essential truth, that love can begin in the most unlikely circumstances, that kindness can change the trajectory of a life, and that two people who choose each other every day can build something that lasts far beyond their own years. The dress with the leather scraps was eventually donated to the Fort Worth Historical Society, where it was preserved behind glass as a symbol of the city's frontier past and as a reminder of the Hamilton love story. School children on field trips would press their noses to the glass and hear the story of the seamstress and the cowboy, of desperation and hope, of fabric and second chances. And in hearing that story, they learned something important about human kindness, about seeing the worth in others, about the power of choosing to help when help is needed. Lily's dress shop continued to operate until the 1960s, when changing fashions and new competition made it difficult to maintain. But by then, 3 generations of Fort Worth women had worn Greenwood originals, each dress made with the same care and attention to detail that Zara had insisted upon, each stitch a small act of love and artistry. The land that Joshua and Zara had owned was developed over the years, but one corner of it was preserved as a small park, with a plaque commemorating their contributions to Fort Worth. Young couples would sometimes have their wedding photos taken there, standing beneath the old oak tree that Joshua had planted the year James was born, continuing the tradition of love and commitment that the Hamiltons represented. Their descendants spread across Texas and beyond, carrying with them the values and stories passed down through the generations. They became teachers and doctors, ranchers and business owners, artists and engineers, each one contributing to their communities in their own way, each one carrying a piece of Joshua and Zara's legacy forward into the future. And on quiet evenings, when those descendants gathered for family reunions or holiday celebrations, someone would always tell the story again. The story of the cowboy who saw a woman mending her dress with leather scraps and decided to do something about it. The story of the fabric he bought her the next day, green as summer grass, soft as hope itself. The story of how that simple act of kindness blossomed into a love that lasted 50 years and created a family that would span generations. It was a story about seeing the worth in others, about taking action instead of just feeling sympathy, about the transformative power of love and partnership. It was a story about the Wild West, about Fort Worth in its frontier days, about hardship and survival, and the determination to build something better. But most of all, it was a story about two people who found each other at exactly the right moment, who chose each other every day for the rest of their lives, and who built something beautiful together from the simplest of beginnings. The dress with the leather scraps remained in its glass case at the Historical Society, a tangible reminder that every great love story has to start somewhere, often in the most unexpected and humble of circumstances. And the green fabric that Joshua had chosen so carefully all those years ago, though long since made into a dress that Zara had worn until it wore out, and was then carefully preserved as another family treasure, lived on in memory and story as a symbol of hope, of second chances, of the moment when two lives intersected and changed each other forever. In the end, Joshua and Zara Hamilton's story was not just about a cowboy and a seamstress in 19th century Texas. It was about the universal human need for connection, for kindness, for someone to see us at our worst and choose to help us become our best. It was about the courage it takes to accept help when you need it, to trust when trust seems dangerous, to open your heart when your heart has been battered by hardship. It was about the miracle that happens when two people commit to building a life together, when they choose partnership over independence, when they decide that what they can create together is worth more than anything they could create alone. And so the story lived on, told and retold, adapted to new times and new audiences, but never losing its essential power, because it was a true story, grounded in the real lives of real people who had struggled and loved and built something lasting. It was a story that reminded people that their circumstances did not define them, that kindness mattered, that love could begin in the most unlikely places and grow into something magnificent. The Hamilton family continued to thrive and grow, spreading across the country and the world, but they always remembered their roots in Fort Worth, Texas, and the love story that had started it all. They remembered the leather scraps and the green fabric, the cowboy and the seamstress, the simple act of kindness that had changed everything. And in remembering, they honored Joshua and Zara's legacy, keeping their love alive through the generations, ensuring that their story would never be forgotten. Because some stories are too important to forget, some love is too powerful to be diminished by time or death, and some people leave a mark on the world that lasts far beyond their years, not through grand gestures or historic achievements, but through the simple act of seeing another person's worth and choosing to help them claim it. Joshua and Zara Hamilton were such people, and their story, the story of the cowboy who bought fabric for a seamstress, and the love that grew from that act of kindness became part of the fabric of Fort Worth itself, woven into the city's history as permanently as Zara's stitches had been woven into that long-ago dress. And so they lived, and so they loved. And so they built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The cowboy and the seamstress, forever bound together by leather scraps and green fabric, by hardship and hope, by a love that began with a simple act of kindness and grew into something that would echo through the generations, reminding everyone who heard their story that love, real love, the kind that lasts, always begins with choosing to see the worth in another person and then acting on that recognition with courage, generosity, and an open heart.